Welcome back. Thomas spent the last stretch telling you that the only alternative to absolute power is a bloodbath. I want to spend this stretch showing you the third option he keeps skipping past: government that can actually be fired.
Fired by whom? A mob.
Fired by the people who created it in the first place, through the very consent that made it legitimate to begin with. Let me finish the story of where I actually lived, because it matters. I watched King James II try to rule England as though the crown answered to no one, packing courts, overriding laws he personally disliked, and acting as though consent was a formality rather than a foundation. In 1688, Parliament invited William and Mary to take the throne instead. James fled, and remarkably, for England at least, it happened with almost no blood spilled. We called it the Glorious Revolution precisely because it was not the horror Thomas lived through. It was proof that a government could be replaced without the sky falling in.
One fortunate outcome does not overturn my argument. You got lucky that your revolution was tidy. Mine was not, and I watched the untidy version up close.
I am not claiming luck did all the work. I am claiming the outcome was tidier precisely because everyone involved already believed on some level that a ruler who breaks the basic contract with his people forfeits his claim to rule them. That belief did not appear from nowhere. It is the whole argument I had already been building. Government exists by consent, for the purpose of protecting life, liberty, and property, and when a government turns against that purpose and starts attacking the very things it was created to protect, the people are entitled to alter it or abolish it and start again.
Say it plainly for the audience. You are describing a right of revolution.
I'm describing exactly that, and I know precisely how dangerous that sounds to a man who watched a king lose his head. But notice the difference. I'm not saying revolt whenever you are unhappy or whenever a tax annoys you. I am saying the bar is a long train of abuses, a government persistently acting against the trust placed in it. Rebellion, in my account, is not the disease. It is the immune response.
An immune response that, in practice, is awfully easy for an ambitious man to fake for his own benefit, dressing up naked ambition as righteous resistance.
That risk is real, and I have never pretended otherwise. But I would rather live with that risk than with your alternative, a sovereign who cannot be resisted no matter what he does, because resistance itself is defined as the one unforgivable crime.
Then let us talk about property, since you are so fond of it, because I think your theory has a much bigger hole here than you admit. You said labor creates property, out in a state of nature, before any government exists to enforce that claim. Fine words, but a claim that cannot be enforced is just a wish. What actually protects your fence and your field is the sword behind the law, which requires exactly the kind of strong, unified authority I have been describing the whole time.
I do not disagree that government enforces property. I disagree completely about where the property comes from and who government answers to while enforcing it. In your system, the sovereign's word is the entire source of what counts as yours, which means he can also take it from you at will, and you have no ground left to stand on to object. In mine, the property is already yours by natural right before government arrives, which means government is answerable to that right, not the author of it. That single distinction is the seed of an enormous amount of what came later: courts that can rule against kings, constitutions that limit what any ruler may seize, entire modern debates about how far a state can go in taxing, regulating, or claiming private property in the name of the public good.
You are fond of claiming credit for the future. Let us test that.
Gladly, because this is not a vague claim, it is a documented one. Roughly a century after I wrote, a group of colonists on another continent sat down to explain why they were breaking from their king, and the document they produced borrows my architecture, almost sentence for sentence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is my life, liberty, and property, lightly reworded. Governments deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed is my consent theory stated as settled fact. The right to alter or abolish a government that becomes destructive of these ends is my right of revolution, almost word for word. The American founding did not casually resemble my arguments. It was built directly on top of them, footnotes and all.
And yet that same founding built a strong federal government with real coercive power, an army, a court system, a chief executive, because even your admirers understood that consent alone does not hold a large society together in a crisis. Every constitution that claims to be built on your ideas still quietly reserves a Hobbesian emergency lever for exactly the moments I described. Wars, insurrections, pandemics, moments when consent needs to move at the speed of a threat.
And I would say that is not a defeat for my theory, it is proof of it working correctly. Even those emergency powers are granted through a constitutional process, limited in time, and theoretically answerable to courts and legislatures afterward. That accountability, however imperfect in practice, is the entire Lockean bargain. Power is lent, not surrendered.
Then let us bring it back to something smaller than nations, so the audience can feel it, not just think it. We already agreed the leaderless team collapses into gridlock. I say that proves my point about needing one final authority.
And I say the overbearing manager, hoarding every decision, punishing every disagreement, proves mine. Here is the honest answer neither of us gets to claim alone. The healthiest teams anyone actually enjoys working on usually land somewhere between our two positions. Someone does hold real authority to make the final call, so decisions actually get made, but that authority is bounded, questionable, and removable if it is abused badly enough. Structure without a tyrant. Order with an off switch.
I will not pretend to love that synthesis, but I will admit it is closer to how functioning modern institutions actually behave than either of our pure positions.
Which brings us to right now, this year, because this argument is not resting comfortably in old books, it is live on the news. Governments around the world are still arguing over how much emergency authority to grant during health crises, security crises, and economic ones. And just as importantly, how quickly that authority gets handed back once the emergency passes. Every time a state extends emergency powers a little longer than the emergency plainly requires, that is a Hobbesian instinct overstaying its welcome. Every time courts, legislatures, or simply public pressure claw those powers back, that is my argument doing its quiet, unglamorous work.
And every time a society becomes so obsessed with limiting power that it cannot respond fast enough to an actual emergency, and people suffer for that hesitation, that failure belongs to him, not to me.
We are not going to resolve that tonight, and honestly, no century has resolved it yet either. That is rather the point of studying us both instead of just one of us. The real, motivating reason to know this argument is that it is still your argument, every time you decide how much authority to hand someone, at work, at home, or at the ballot box, and how much of your own freedom you are willing to trade for the promise of safety.
So hold both of us in your head at once. Order is precious and fragile. Liberty is precious and fragile. Anyone selling you a system with none of the tension between them is selling you something false.
Which sets up our next thinker perfectly, because he took one small piece of my argument, that individuals pursuing their own property and their own interest is natural and even admirable, and he built an entire theory of economic life on top of it. Where I asked what makes government legitimate, he asked what makes a whole economy actually work, and his answer would end up reshaping the modern world every bit as much as ours did.
Next time, Adam Smith, and the strange idea that a butcher, a brewer, and a baker pursuing nothing but their own self-interest could somehow add up to the wealth of an entire nation. See you then.